You smell it before you see it. Motor oil, cordite, the copper penny tang of arterial blood freezing on concrete. It's the 14th of February 1929, Chicago, the SMC Cartage Company garage on North Clark Street. You're standing in the cold, your breath fogging in the morning air, and 7 men are slumped against a bullet-pocked brick wall. 70 rounds, 45 caliber Tommy guns, 2 12-gauge shotguns for the cleanup. The wall behind them looks like Swiss cheese soaked in red wine. Welcome to the Jazz Age. You've been sold a story about this era. You've seen the movie. Leonardo DiCaprio in a pink suit, raising a champagne flute. Flapper girls kicking their heels at the Cotton Club. Sinatra croons it. Hollywood polishes it. Your grandmother romanticizes it. The roaring 20s pearls and saxophones and Gatsby staring out across a green light, dreaming about a girl on the other side of the bay. Now forget all of it. That story is the cover photo. This, the garage, the cordite, the 7 cooling bodies. This is the receipt. The truth about the early American Mafia isn't a story about honor. It isn't a story about family. It isn't a romantic epic about Sicilian men of principle protecting their own. That's the marketing copy. That's what they want you to remember. That's what gets the Godfather poster onto a college dorm wall. The truth is colder than that. The truth is that while you were sipping bootleg gin in a basement speakeasy, swaying to a brass quartet, ripping through Ain't Misbehavin', the booze in your glass was 15% wood, alcohol, methanol, courtesy of the United States Treasury Department, which had deliberately poisoned industrial spirits to teach you a lesson about temperance. 10,000 Americans died from federally mandated bootleg. Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon went home to his mansion. You went blind in a tenement. The truth is that while Al Capone was handing out turkeys to the unemployed for the newsreels, his enforcers were beating Chicago shop owners with lead pipes for failing to pay protection, while Lucky Luciano was getting his shoes shined on Mulberry Street. His men were folding rival mobsters into oil drums and dropping them into the Hudson, while America was building the future assembly lines, skyscrapers, mass production. A small group of men in Brooklyn was applying the exact same logic to the production of corpses, because that's what this really was. The early American Mafia wasn't a brotherhood, it was a corporation, a vertically integrated, board-governed, profit-maximizing corporation with subsidiaries in liquor, labor, narcotics, prostitution, and what they politely called removal services. Murder Incorporated. The commission. They had middle managers. They had cost analyses. They had a fee schedule for hits, $1,000 for a soldier, $5 for a captain, more if you wanted it to look like an accident. They had bookkeepers. They had lawyers. They had cops on retainer and judges on speed dial. And they had bodies, conservatively, 1,000 of them, probably more. Nobody was really counting. Over the next 40 minutes, you're going down 3 levels, each one worse than the last. We're starting in the tenement filth of Mulberry Bend, where the Black Hand shook down its own people for pocket change. We're climbing into the prohibition meat grinder, where the government and the gangsters were quietly killing Americans together. And we're ending in a Brooklyn candy store where men in cheap suits voted on whose mother got a casket that Tuesday. You think you know this story. You don't. Look down. The pavement is still wet. Wipe that pavement back 40 years. Strip away the Tommy guns. Strip away the speakeasies. Strip away Capone, Luciano, the fedoras, the whole Hollywood production. Go back to where this thing actually started. It's 1895 Lower Manhattan. You're standing on the corner of Mulberry and Bayard in the rotten heart of 5 Points. The smell is the first thing that hits you: boiled cabbage, horse manure baking in the August sun, raw sewage running in the gutters, and the sour milk stink of human bodies, packed 12 to a tenement room. This is the cradle. This is where the American Mafia gets born. You've seen the photos. Jacob Riis took them. How the other half-lives, 1,890, a family of 7, sharing a coal dust room with no window. A teenage girl with rickets, her legs bent like a wishbone, working a sewing machine 16 hours a day for $1.50. A baby asleep in a fruit crate because there isn't a crib in the building. That's not a fictional scene. That's a Tuesday between 1,880 and 1,924. 4 million Italians get off boats in New York Harbor. Most of them are decent people, farmers, stonemasons, tailors. They came for the same reason everybody came, because Sicily was a feudal nightmare run by absentee landlords, and the alternative was watching their kids starve. But a small percentage of those 4 million, maybe 1 in 1,000, didn't leave the old country empty-handed. They brought a souvenir. They brought the Cosca, the Sicilian extortion racket, and they unpacked it in the tenements of New York like it was the family Bible. This was the Black Hand, La Mano Nera. Here's how it worked. You're an Italian shopkeeper. You run a fruit stand on Elizabeth Street. You've been in America 6 years. You've scraped together $200, every penny of it. You have a wife and 4 kids in a 2-room walk-up above the shop. One morning, an envelope shows up under your door. No return address. Inside, a letter written in your own dialect. At the bottom, a crude drawing of a black palm print and a dagger. The text is almost businesslike. It says, "Pay us $200 by Friday, or your oldest son will not come home from school." You go to the police. The police shrug. They don't speak Italian. They don't care about Italian. As far as the NYPD in 1903 is concerned, what happens between immigrants in 5 Points is not American business. So you pay. Next month, they ask for 300. 6 months later, they ask for everything you have. This is the first business model. Not whiskey, not casinos, not unions. The shaking down of the poorest people in America by the second poorest people in America. That's the foundation. That's the cornerstone of every glittering Vegas casino, every Hollywood mob biopic, every Sopranos-themed birthday cake your cousin throws. It all started with terrified shopkeepers handing nickels to thugs in a tenement hallway. And if you didn't pay, meet Ignazio Saietta. They called him Lupo the Wolf. Lupo ran a horse stable on East 107th Street in East Harlem. Officially, unofficially, it was a slaughterhouse. Investigators would later call it the murder stables. The walls were thick. The neighbors knew not to ask questions. Lupo would drag uncooperative debtors there, torture them, sometimes for days, strangle them, and dissolve what was left in pits of quicklime in the cellar. Conservative estimate: 60 victims, probably more. The exact number is impossible to verify because most of the bodies were liquefied into a chalky sludge that drained into the East River. 60 people worked over, murdered, erased for nickels. So let's kill a myth right here while we're standing in the cellar. You've heard the line, the Mafia were men of honor. The Mafia protected their communities. The Mafia had a code. This is the propaganda the organization later sold to itself, to the press, and to Francis Ford Coppola. The reality? In the first 30 years of its American existence, the Mafia's customer base was almost entirely other Italians. Poor Italians, defenseless Italians, recently arrived Italians who couldn't speak English and were terrified of cops. The Black Hand didn't protect the Italian community, it ate the Italian community. The lambs were the menu. There was one cop who saw it clearly. His name was Lieutenant Joseph Petrosino. Petrosino was a stocky, square-jawed son of Italian immigrants who joined the NYPD in 1883. He spoke fluent Sicilian and Neapolitan dialect. He built the department's Italian squad, 5 detectives, then 10, then 15, and by 1908, he'd personally arrested or deported over 500 Black Hand operatives. The Mafia wanted him dead, badly. In February 1909, Petrosino sailed to Palermo on a secret intelligence mission to dig up criminal records on Sicilian mobsters operating in America. It wasn't secret enough. Somebody historians still argue who leaked his itinerary to the wrong people. On the evening of the 12th of March, 1909, Lieutenant Petrosino walked across Piazza Marina in Palermo to meet an informant. 2 men stepped out of the shadows. They put 4 bullets in him. He died in the rain on the cobblestones. He was 48 years old. He remains the only NYPD officer ever assassinated on foreign soil. The killers were never convicted. The NYPD learned a valuable lesson that day. Don't send your best Italian-speaking detective alone to Sicily. They never sent another one. Problem solved. Meanwhile, 10 blocks south of Petrosino's funeral, America was busy grinding up its other poor people just fine, without help from the Mafia. In a loft on the corner of Green Street and Washington Place, 146 garment workers, most of them Italian and Jewish immigrant girls, some as young as 14, would burn alive on March 25, 1911, in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, because the owners had chained the exit doors shut to keep the workers from sneaking smoke breaks. The girls jumped from the 9th floor windows rather than burn. Witnesses on the sidewalk said the sound of the bodies hitting the pavement was steady and rhythmic, like a clock. In Pennsylvania, 8-year-old boys were hand-sorting slate out of coal chutes in the anthracite mines, breathing dust so thick they coughed up black phlegm by lunch. In a textile mill in North Carolina, a 12-year-old girl was losing her arm to a loom she was too small to operate. This is the country the Mafia was being born into, a country that already saw its poor as raw material, a country with an industrial appetite for the bodies of its working class. The Mafia wasn't an aberration in this America. The Mafia was just competing for the same suppliers. By 1919, the Black Hand had quietly killed something close to 1,000 people, made tens of millions of dollars, and remained, in the eyes of mainstream America, essentially invisible. A problem for Italians, not a problem for Americans. That was about to change, because on the 17th of January 1920, the United States Congress was going to do something so spectacularly, gloriously, monumentally stupid that it would transform a tenement extortion racket into the most powerful organized crime syndicate in human history. They were going to ban beer. Quick question for you. Pause this video right here. If you'd been that shopkeeper on Mulberry Street in 1903, wife upstairs, 4 kids asleep, a Black Hand letter sliding under your door demanding everything you owned, would you have paid? Would you have run? Or would you have stayed and fought, knowing your kids were the collateral? Don't give me the brave answer. Give me the honest one. Drop it in the comments. I want to read every single one. And if you want more of the history your textbook left out on purpose, the stuff that doesn't make it onto a postage stamp, hit that like button. It feeds the algorithm with real history. The algorithm is hungry, so am I. Now stay with me, because the next 40 years are going to make the Black Hand look like a children's choir. The 17th of January, 1920, midnight. The Volstead Act takes effect. The 18th Amendment kicks in. The sale, manufacture, and transportation of intoxicating liquors is now illegal in every state in the Union. Congress is feeling proud of itself. The Anti-Saloon League is throwing a party with grape juice. The Methodists are celebrating. The Baptists are praying. America has just outlawed the 3rd most popular activity in the country. After working and breathing, demand for alcohol does not decrease, not by a single drop. What happens instead is the most predictable thing in human economic history. A massive, lucrative, completely unregulated black market opens up overnight. And the only people in America with the infrastructure, the violence, the cash reserves, and the international shipping contacts to fill it are the same crews that have been running protection rackets out of tenement basements for the last 20 years. Congratulations, Washington. You just handed the keys to the kingdom to Lupo, the wolf's grandchildren. The money is unbelievable. The exact numbers are hard to nail down. The Mafia, surprisingly, did not file tax returns, but conservative estimates put Prohibition-era bootleg revenues at $3 billion a year, that's $1,925. In today's money, you're looking at a $50 billion industry, bigger than the auto sector, bigger than steel, entirely off the books, entirely controlled by men who would later be photographed in mugshots. But let's talk about the actual product for a second, because the romanticized version of Prohibition is bathtub gin at a speakeasy bohemian, a little naughty, a little dangerous, scored by a saxophone. The real version is poison. Bootleg booze in the 1920s was, in technical terms, garbage. Crews bought industrial alcohol used for paint thinner, fuel, antifreeze, redistilled it badly, cut it with glycerin or juniper berries to mask the taste, colored it with caramel or iodine, and bottled it in repurposed medicine jars. If you were lucky, it just gave you a vicious hangover and made you go temporarily blind for 6 hours. If you were unlucky, it killed you outright. The smell of a 1,925 speakeasy wasn't whiskey and cigarettes. It was kerosene, paint thinner, and rotting fruit layered under cheap perfume. And here's the part nobody teaches you in school. The part that should make you genuinely angry. The United States federal government knew that bootleggers were stealing industrial alcohol, and the government's response was not to crack down on the theft. The government's response was to make the industrial alcohol more poisonous on purpose, so that when bootleggers stole it and sold it, the people drinking it would get sick or die and learn their lesson about prohibition. This is real. This is documented. It was called the Federal Industrial Alcohol Denaturation Program. Starting in 1926, under Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon, the formula was deliberately spiked with methanol, kerosene, benzene, mercury salts, and other compounds known to cause blindness, paralysis, and death. By the end of Prohibition in 1933, an estimated 10,000 Americans had died from federally poisoned bootleg. Read that again. The United States government, sworn to protect its citizens, deliberately poisoned the alcohol supply because it knew its citizens were going to drink it anyway. Mellon kept his job. The policy continued. New York City's chief medical examiner, Charles Norris, publicly called it our national experiment in extermination. Editorial pages screamed, "Nobody in Washington resigned. Nobody went to prison. The Mafia didn't poison those 10,000 Americans. The Treasury Department did. And while we're handing out gold medals for federally assisted mass poisoning, let's talk about the Jake Leg epidemic. The bootleg market is so saturated that ordinary working people, especially in the rural South and Midwest, can't even afford the bad gin. So they switch to Jamaica ginger, extract a patent medicine sold legally at drugstores, 70% alcohol, marketed as a remedy for an upset stomach. They drink it straight. They call it Jake. One batch of Jake, manufactured by two enterprising chemists in Boston named Harry Gross and Max Reisman, gets cut with a plasticizer called triorthocresyl phosphate, TOCP, because it was cheap and it passed the government's required alcohol test. TOCP is a neurotoxin. It destroys the motor neurons in your lower spinal cord. Between 50,000 and 100,000 Americans drank that Jake. They woke up the next morning, unable to lift their feet properly. The condition was permanent. They walked with a strange, slapping, dragging gait for the rest of their lives. The Jake leg. Most of them were poor. Most of them were black. There was no treatment. There was no compensation. Gross and Reisman were eventually charged. They got 2 years. Suspended. They walked away. Their customers, mostly, did not. You will not see this in a prohibition documentary. Now, let's go to Chicago. This is where the myth machine really kicks into high gear. The fedora, the cigar, the pinstripe suit. Alphonse Gabriel Capone. Hollywood loves Capone. They've made, I'm not exaggerating, over 100 films featuring some version of him. They love him because he was quotable, charismatic, and conveniently photogenic. He gave speeches. He made wisecracks. He opened a soup kitchen during the Depression and posed for newsreels with a ladle. You're supposed to think of him as a kind of swaggering folk villain, a Chicago rogue with a heart of gold buried under all the murder. Let me tell you what Capone actually was. Capone was a guy who, in May 1929, hosted a banquet at the Roadhouse near Hammond, Indiana, for 3 of his own captains he suspected of disloyalty. He fed them a steak dinner, made a toast. Then his men tied them to their chairs, and Capone personally beat them to death with a baseball bat after dinner, in front of the rest of his organization, to make a point. Witnesses said he was sweating and out of breath when it was over. The bodies were dumped on a country road outside Hammond, Indiana. The skulls were, in the polite phrasing of one investigator, soft to the touch. That's not a Robin Hood. That's a butcher with a publicist. Capone's soup kitchen, by the way, opened in November 1930, 3 weeks after he was indicted on federal tax charges, pure public relations. The man whose money paid for it had been extorting that exact neighborhood for 10 years. And then we get to the 14th of February 1929, the thing this whole video opened with, the Street Valentine's Day Massacre. Capone's outfit was at war with the North Side Gang, run by a guy named George Bugs Moran. The plan: lure Moran's crew to the SMC Cartage Garage on North Clark Street with a fake bootleg shipment. Send in 4 shooters, 2 of them dressed as Chicago police. Line everybody up against the brick wall, hands behind their heads, and open up with 2 Thompson submachine guns and a pair of 12 gauges. 70 rounds in under 30 seconds. 7 dead. Bugs Moran, the actual target, was running late for the meet. He saw the police uniforms going in from down the block, assumed it was a raid, and turned around. He survived. The other 7 did not. Capone wasn't even in town. He was sitting on a beach in Florida with a verifiable alibi, sipping rum, when the trigger got pulled 1,400 miles north. That's not loyalty. That's good middle management. Now you know the story of the brave Elliot Ness and the Untouchables, right? Kevin Costner, Sean Connery, Robert De Niro, the lawmen who couldn't be
The numbers
bought?
don't lie.
Reality
I
check.
need to adjust the take from
Ness
the
and
Brownsville
his
route
crew
immediately.
did some good work raiding breweries. They genuinely did. But they did not bring Capone down. They couldn't. Chicago in 1929 was so thoroughly bought that the entire police force, the mayor's office, the county courts, and most of the city council were on the payroll. Mayor Big Bill Thompson was personally taking envelopes. Capone's chief political fixer, Jake Guzik, kept the ledger names, amounts, dates, thousands of dollars a week to everyone. Capone wasn't convicted of bootlegging. He wasn't convicted of murder. He wasn't convicted of running a criminal syndicate that killed at least 33 men in Chicago alone in the year 1926. He was convicted in October 1931 of failure to file an income tax return. The most violent gangster in American history got taken down by an accountant. That's not a triumph of justice. That's a confession. But here's the thing about Capone. The men who really ran the American underworld weren't impressed by him. Not really. He was loud. He was sloppy. He left bodies in public. He drew federal heat. He couldn't even stay out of jail on a tax charge. The men in New York were watching Chicago and shaking their heads. They had a different vision. Quieter, smarter, permanent. They were going to take everything Capone had built. The booze, the rackets, the political bribes, the killing, and they were going to put it inside a corporate structure, departments, bylaws, a board of directors, a national governing council. They were going to industrialize it, and in a Brooklyn candy store, above a stretch of pavement, still warm from a Tommy gun summer, they were about to vote on whose mother got a casket that Tuesday. Welcome to 1930. Welcome to the war. You won't find this one in your high school textbook, even though it killed almost as many men in New York City as the Italian campaign of World War II killed in a typical month. They called it the Castellamarese War. It was a year-long bloodletting between two factions of old country Sicilian Mafia bosses, and the prize was control of every illegal dollar moving through the most powerful city in the world. On one side, Giuseppe Joe, the boss Massacre, fat, paranoid, brutal, semi-literate, ran Lower Manhattan out of a back room in Little Italy. On the other, Salvatore Maranzano, tall, learned, ran the Bronx and Brooklyn, quoted Julius Caesar to his men in the original Latin, called himself a soldier, wanted to be emperor. These two were the last of the old mustache-pites Sicilian bosses who'd come over before the First World War and still ran their crews like medieval barons.
Are they paid off?
They despised each other. They each had about 150 to 200 made men, and between February 1930 and April 1931, they put roughly 60 of those men into the ground, bodies in alleys, bodies in car trunks, bodies in the East River with the hands cut off so the corpses couldn't be identified. The smell at certain construction sites in Queens that spring was, according to one investigator, like a butcher shop In
Take a
August,
look at this
with the
fracture point
cooler
on the
off,
glass, detective.
here's
Got
what the
it.
old men didn't
They
understand.
left in a hurry.
They thought they were fighting for control of the Mafia. They didn't realize the war was already over, and they had both already lost, because underneath them, a younger generation of Sicilian and Italian and Jewish mobsters had been quietly drawing up
Did you hear what happened
blueprints.
upstairs?
They didn't care about
Keep your
Sicilian
voice
honor.
down.
They didn't
We don't
care
want any
about
trouble.
regional grudges. They didn't care about Julius Caesar. They cared about money. The leader of this new generation was a kid from Lucara Friddi named Salvatore Lucania. You know him as Lucky Luciano. Luciano was 33 years old, already a millionaire, spoke unaccented English, wore tailored suits from London. He saw the future, and the future did not include two illiterate Sicilians screaming at each other over territory in the Bronx. So Luciano cut a deal. He went to Maranzano, his current boss's enemy, and offered to take out Massacre. Maranzano agreed. The 15th of April, 1931, Coney Island, Nuova Villa Tamaro restaurant. Luciano invites Joe the boss to lunch. They eat clams and drink Chianti for 3 hours. After the meal, they start playing cards. Luciano excuses himself to the bathroom. He stays in there. 4 gunmen walk through the front door. Bugsy Siegel, Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese, Joe Adonis. They put 20 bullets into Massacre across the dinner table. He dies face down in his plate of clams, still holding a card. Local legend says it was the Ace of Diamonds. The crime scene photo is real. Look it up. Massacre's hand is still on the table, fingers curled around something. You can decide for yourself what it is. Luciano came out of the bathroom, stepped over the body, told the cops he'd been washing his hands and didn't hear a thing. They believed him, or pretended to. Massacre's funeral was 3 days later. Maranzano declared himself capo di tutti capi, boss of all bosses. He threw a banquet. He gave a speech about how the war was over and he was now in charge of organized crime in America. He talked for 2 hours about Caesar and Augustus. He had less than 5 months to live because Luciano had already made the second deal, the one Maranzano didn't know about. The 10th of September, 1931, Maranzano's office at 230 Park Avenue, 9th floor, mid-afternoon. 4 men walk in, dressed as IRS agents, carrying briefcases. They tell the secretary they're here for a tax audit. She lets them through. The 4 men aren't Italian. They're Jewish gunmen Luciano borrowed from his friend Meyer Lansky, specifically chosen because Maranzano wouldn't recognize them on sight. They lock the office door, draw knives, and stab Maranzano repeatedly. When he keeps fighting, they shoot him 4 times, dead on his own carpet. Whole job took 90 seconds. The killers walked out of the lobby, past 2 real cops, chatting in the hallway, tipped their hats, took a cab to Penn Station. And here's where you've probably been told one of the great Mafia legends. The story goes that on the same day Maranzano died, the 10th of September 1931, Luciano's men nationwide carried out a coordinated slaughter of every old-school mustache Pete boss in the country. 40 bosses, maybe 50, maybe 90, depending on who's telling it, all killed within 24 hours. They called it the Night of the Sicilian Vespers. It's an incredible story. It's also almost entirely a lie. Modern historians going through the actual police records of that week have confirmed exactly 3 Mafia killings on or around the 10th of September 1931 that might plausibly be connected to a coordinated purge. Not 40, not 50, 3, maybe 4. The big nationwide bloodbath was largely invented by a low-level informant named Joe Valentine when he testified before Congress in 1963, and the press ran with it because it made a great headline. The Mafia didn't just kill people, it rewrote its own mythology. The Night of the Sicilian Vespers was a brand campaign, and it worked. What actually happened in the fall of 1931 was something less dramatic and far more dangerous. Luciano held a meeting. He proposed a structure, 5 families in New York, equal seats, a national governing council, the commission composed of the bosses of the 5 New York families, plus representatives from Chicago, Buffalo, and a few other major cities. Disputes between families would be resolved by vote. Hits on members of one family by another would require commission approval. Murder, in other words, would now be regulated by committee. This is the most important moment in the history of American organized crime. This is the moment the Mafia stops being a mob and starts being a corporation. And, like every good corporation, it needed an enforcement arm. Welcome to Brooklyn. Welcome to Murder Incorporated. Murder Incorporated was headquartered, no joke, above a candy store on the corner of Saratoga and Livonia in Brownsville, Brooklyn. The store was called Midnight Roses. It sold egg creams and the daily news to neighborhood kids by day. By night, the men in the back room took phone calls and assigned contracts. The CEO of Murder Incorporated was Louis Lepke Buchalter, a soft-spoken garment district extortionist who would eventually become the only American mafia boss ever executed by the state. Sing Sing, Electric Chair, the 4th of March, 1944. The COO was Albert Anastasia, known professionally as the Lord High Executioner. The pricing was published internally, like a McDonald's menu. A standard hit on a soldier, $1,000, expenses included. A hit on a captain, $5,000. A hit that required out-of-town travel and clean disposal, $10,000 and up. A hit that needed to look like an accident, negotiable but expensive. The preferred tools were specific. The ice pick was favored because it left no exit wound and produced very little blood. Slide it in behind the ear, into the brainstem. Victim collapses, you walk out. The garrote was used for victims who needed to die quietly in confined spaces. And then there was the bag, a method for victims who needed to disappear. Put the body in a canvas duffel. If the corpse was too tall, break the legs first to make it fit. Load it into a car trunk. drive to one of 3 pre-arranged dumping sites in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. Best estimate on Murder Incorporated's total body count between 1,931 and 1,941, somewhere between 400 and 1,000 confirmed killings. The bookkeeping was meticulous. They kept ledgers. They filed expense reports. Henry Ford built the assembly line for cars. Lepke Buchalter built it for corpses. Both men were efficient. Only one is on a postage stamp. The whole operation almost got exposed in 1940 when a Brownsville button man named Abe Kid Twist Reles got picked up and decided to talk. Reles had personally killed somewhere between 11 and 30 people. He knew where the bodies were buried, literally. He gave the DA enough information to send Lepke to the chair and put 7 other Murder Incorporated soldiers in the ground after him. The DA put Reles under 24-hour police protection at the Half Moon Hotel in Coney Island, 6th floor, with 6 officers on rotating guard duty outside his door. The morning of the 12th of November 1941 at 7:10 a.m., Reles was found dead on the pavement 6 stories below his window. A bedsheet rope was tied to the radiator. Officially, he was trying to escape, and he fell. He'd been in protective custody for 18 months and never once tried to escape. 6 cops were on duty. Nobody saw anything. Nobody heard anything. The investigation was closed within a week. The press called him the canary who could sing but couldn't fly. The trial against the remaining Mafia leadership collapsed. Without Reles, there was no case. And here's the worst part.
Look here.
The part that should keep you up tonight. It worked. All of it. The commission, Murder Incorporated, the killings, the bribes, the fake Sicilian Vespers. Lucky Luciano lived to 64 and died of a heart attack at the Naples airport in 1962, a free man surrounded by friends. Frank Costello, his successor, died peacefully in his own bed at 82. Meyer Lansky died in Miami at 80 in 1983. Last public estimate of his net worth, $300 million. These men did not die in prison cells. They died on yachts. The American justice system, the FBI, the courts, the Congress, every institution we're taught to trust, looked at the commission for 40 years and could not or would not dismantle it. It took until 1986 for federal prosecutors, using a law called RICO that was specifically designed for this problem, to finally convict the heads of the 5 families in what they called the commission trial. By then, every founder was already dead. The Mafia didn't lose. The Mafia just got old. Quick check-in, 15 seconds. If you're still watching this far, please click like. Seriously. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm that buried American history deserves to be seen, because we're about to enter the darkest part of the story, the part where you find out where all of this went next, the part where you find out who really won. Don't skip the outro. Walk back to the garage. The 14th of February 19, 29.
The take was like
North
this
Clark
month.
Street, Chicago. 7 men against a brick
We
wall.
handle it quiet.
You remember
like we
the smell,
discussed.
motor oil,
This is the first
cordite,
installment.
the copper penny tang of frozen
service will
blood.
be rendered
You
as
thought
agreed.
you were looking at a crime scene. You weren't. You were
Numbers on
looking
this receipt
at a
for the
balance
strong-arm
sheet.
job don't
Those
add up
7
right.
men
He's shooting
weren't
the casualty
an
again.
aberration.
Make a note of it.
They weren't a tragedy. They weren't a moral outrage that the system swooped in to correct. They were a routine line
The
item.
union
They
takes 20%
were
off the
Q,
top. That
one
still leaves us
operating
undercut by the
expenses
O'Malley bid.
for an American corporation
Use the cash.
that paid
Make it
bigger
happen.
dividends than General Motors and operated in continuous, profitable existence for over half a century. The Mafia didn't lose. Read that sentence again. The Mafia did not lose. By every metric a corporation uses to measure itself, longevity, market share, executive net worth, succession planning, regulatory capture, the early American Mafia was one of the most successful business ventures in the history of this country.
We
They
can't let
built
these
a
tenements
machine
delay the
that ran
modernization
on
project.
human meat,
Agreed.
and the
new
machine
zoning
paid out
overrides
for
any
60
historical
years
concerns.
before
Stamp it
anyone
and
laid a
move to the
real
next
glove on
block.
it.
We need to
The men
verify
who
these
pulled
numbers
the
against
triggers
main ledger.
in that Chicago garage
I already
died
checked
of natural
page 42.
causes.
It doesn't match
The men who
envelopes.
ordered the triggers pulled died on yachts in Miami harbors. The men who voted on the contracts in a Brooklyn candy store had grandchildren who became lawyers and senators and real estate developers, and those grandchildren never spent a single day in a tenement. The smog over the Industrial Revolution never lifted. It just changed addresses. The Jazz Age didn't end. The flappers got mortgages. The Tommy guns got quieter. The fedoras became boardroom suits. The bootleg dollars got laundered through casinos and unions and construction companies. And eventually, those casinos and unions and construction companies started writing checks to political campaigns, and eventually the people running them weren't called gangsters anymore. They were called businessmen. That's the real, terrifying truth about the early American Mafia. Not that they were monsters, they were, but monsters get caught. Monsters get hunted. Monsters get burned at the stake on the front page of the New York Times. The terrifying truth is that they weren't monsters. They were entrepreneurs. They looked at what America was actually made of: cheap labor, cheap law, cheap life, and they built a business model around
These
it.
3 blocks here,
They
the
didn't
conditions
break
are simply
the American
unacceptable.
system.
They have to come
They
down.
understood
All right, schedule
the
the
American
displacement for early
system.
spring. We need
They
that
worked
land clear.
it. They mastered it. And then they took its lessons and went legitimate. Every soup kitchen with a PR photographer behind it. Every politician with a sealed donor list. Every union local with a quiet friend in shipping. Every poor neighborhood that got cleared by urban redevelopment. Look closely. You'll see the fingerprints. The blood washed off the pavement a long time ago. The ledger never closed. So, you made it to the end. Look down. The pavement under your feet is still wet, but it isn't blood anymore. It's a quarterly report. If you're still here, if you went the whole 40 minutes down into the dark and came back out, drop the word "survived" in the comments. One word, all caps. We read every single one. And subscribe to Grim Reality, because next week we're going somewhere worse. The smog hasn't lifted yet,